Hello, my name is Paul Marchbanks, and this is Digging in the Dirt. Today, I'll be revisiting my earlier life as a comic book collector, a hobby which has enriched my appreciation of comic book movies over the last 2 decades. I collected comic books avidly for almost 30 years, confesses the literature professor who now teaches primarily novels, film, and poetry. I do occasionally teach a graphic novel like Alan Moore's Watchmen, but I left behind my monthly runs to the comic book shop a couple years after introducing our girls to DC cartoons like the Justice League and Teen Titans. This wasn't an abandonment of Marvel, which I had preferred to DC since middle school. I would introduce my daughters to the Uncanny X-Men and the New Mutants once I could trust them to handle my collectibles with care. And I continued to eagerly await each new X-Men movie from Fox Studios or Spider-Man flick from Sony. I also thoroughly enjoyed the first 3 phases of the Marvel movies, which recently took the world by storm. No, the reason I stopped collecting comic books can be traced to one particular issue that Marvel released in July of 2008. You see, between 2001 and 2007, Michael J. Straczynski, the creator of the reliably compelling sci-fi show Babylon 5, wrote one of Marvel's flagship titles, The Amazing Spider-Man. Throughout the 80s, I'd been rather sporadic in my reading of this title, let alone Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, and Web of Spider-Man. I'd enjoyed the newer Spider-Man while it was being drawn by Todd McFarlane in the 90s, but I was no hardcore devotee. My preference was for all the mutant titles, including Alpha Flight, which is essentially the Canadian version of the X-Men, and Excalibur, which was set in Great Britain. Straczynski, however, transformed the Spider-Man mythos in fascinating ways by suggesting that Peter Parker's special powers might be totemistic. More importantly, he tackled Peter's rocky marriage to Mary Jane, which had existed in the comics since 1987, and slowly brought the estranged couple back together. Prior to their separation, MJ had felt, as she explains to Peter, quote, "Like everything I did on my own was just a distraction from the important stuff that he was doing. And I can't be a distraction. I can't be a diversion. I can't be second place, Peter." Accordingly, she had spent time away developing her own modeling and acting career. Straczynski manages to bring them back together in a way that respects both characters' personal callings, and in the process provides a few practical observations about what it takes to make a romantic relationship work. Before this storyline, I had had limited success sharing comic books with Tracy, but she took quickly to Straczynski's writing and enjoyed his 6-year run as thoroughly as I did. We were in our own first decade of married life and found the young couple's stressors realistic enough to be relatable, though I have to admit, neither Tracy nor I ever revealed a secret identity to the public, inadvertently putting our family members in the crosshairs of deadly enemies, as Peter Parker did in the Civil War storyline. We could, however, relate to the challenge of reconciling individual aspirations that were moving in different directions. Here was proof positive that comic books could be written for adults committed to the hard work and sacrifice required in a lifelong romance. There were 4 other regular Spider-Man titles in existence at the time, but The Amazing Spider-Man scratched an itch no other series had managed to touch. And then Marvel decided they couldn't leave well enough alone. Up to this point, they had given Straczynski carte blanche to write adult tales about Spider-Man. Straczynski has noted in the years since that he would have been happy to write about Peter's and MJ's marriage indefinitely. Instead, Marvel decided that their best-selling title needed to skew younger, so they erased the marriage by putting Peter in an impossible situation. With his Aunt May's life hanging in the balance after being shot by one of Kingpin's assassins, Peter was given a choice by the devil himself, known as Mephisto in Marvel Comics, to exchange his years of marriage to MJ and all the memories they had accumulated for his elderly aunt's life. Peter took the offer and Marvel erased 20 years of comic book history. Now, I'm all for valuing, respecting, and personally caring for our elders as they move into their twilight years. But I also believe that if one decides to get married, one's partner should become their first priority. I should have known better. Comic publishers are infamous for erasing hard-hitting storylines to bump up sales. Their most infamous ploy is to make headlines by eliminating a favorite character only to restore them to life when sales begin to wane again. Which of our storied superheroes have been killed and resurrected, you ask? The most famous example is probably Superman at the hands of Doomsday back in 1992, but nearly every other powered champion has met her or his death in the comics too, including Captain America, Wolverine, the Hulk, Iron Man, the Punisher, Miss Marvel, Thor, Mr. Fantastic, the Torch, Invisible Woman, Cyclops, Professor X, Storm, Kitty Pryde, Jean Grey, Colossus, Quicksilver, Shaman, Guardian, and so very many others. Most of these have died multiple times and always, inevitably, been restored to the land of the living within a year or two. Killing off a character grants readers the temporary illusion that extraordinary figures capable of walking through walls, flying at hypersonic speeds, and nailing distant targets with concussive energy shot from their eyes have limitations like the rest of us. Unlike those comic strip characters in the Sunday paper like Snoopy and Calvin, who barely age and most definitely never face death, superheroes imperil their own lives for the good of others and sometimes pay the ultimate cost. Except that they don't, really. And the resurrections they're granted concretize neither the horrors or glorious renewals promised by our world's religions. These aren't the dramatic returns to life found in thrillers like Flatliners and Constantine, in which a returnee brings back intimate knowledge of a hellscape. The horror these characters do provide is the reminder that humans can't bear to think about the ramifications of our mortality for very long. We prefer the sort of fantasy in our fiction that casts humans as heroes, heroes capable of surmounting all obstacles, whether superpowered or not. The character of Wolverine, introduced in 1974 as a violent operative barely kept under control by the Canadian government, became a much more complex character soon after joining a New York-based superhero team led by Professor X in 1975. As a member of the X-Men, he gradually learned to rein in his temper and work alongside others. In the occasional uncharacteristically cheerful issue, he even kicks back enough to play baseball with his teammates, or laughs uproariously after playing a joke on someone. His very dangerous berserker rage is always lying just beneath the surface, however, a product of multiple traumas that Marvel has revealed piecemeal over a few very long decades. This horrifying past defines Wolverine, spawning violent impulses that manifest when confronted with everything from the romance of Cyclops with the beautiful Jean Grey, whom he loves himself, to righteous fury in the face of others' unjust persecution. The healing factor that knits his body back together after each new assault cannot heal a soul broken repeatedly by betrayal, jealousy, and sorrow. At times, the long life granted by that superpower, which slows his aging and allows him to smoke and drink with impunity, seems more a curse than a blessing, an excruciating form of torture that merely allows him to suffer more than his fair share in both body and mind. This is one of the character elements that the films, created by Bryan Singer, Brett Ratner, Matthew Vaughn, and James Mangold, so effectively captured over a 17-year stretch, with flashbacks aplenty to underscore the troubled past that makes Wolverine's heart so difficult to reach. Unfortunately for him, letting down his guard often enables still more suffering when he's confronted with situations that require a sacrifice. In the third X-Men film, he must kill someone he loves in order to protect the entire world. And in Mangold's Logan, he gives his own life to save a group of children. This ultimate surrender of self wrapped up Hugh Jackman's incredible run as Wolverine, granting the character a beautifully heroic ending that perfectly capped his tortured journey. So, when Ryan Reynolds proposed to bring Deadpool and Wolverine back together again, they first faced off in the regrettable, forgettable film Wolverine Origins from 2009, it was going to require some of those comic book hijinks I was talking about earlier. Either resurrect Wolverine, find another Wolverine in a parallel universe, or clone him, as happened multiple times in the movie Logan. Whatever the filmmakers chose to do, I knew it would require stealing dramatic power from the ending of what I consider to be one of the greatest superhero films of the current century, right up there with The Dark Knight and Captain America Winter Soldier. I would never be able to watch Logan the same way again. Death would lose its sting and the notion of sacrifice its virtue. And with Deadpool's crass comedy leading the way, that trauma, which had been woven into Wolverine's character as indelibly as the adamantium which laces his bones, would either be ignored or parodied. I was not wrong. What do you think of the box office smash Deadpool and Wolverine, which may well surpass Todd Phillips' Joker to become the largest R-rated release ever? Is the tonal shift as welcome as Taika Waititi's take on the God of Thunder in Thor Ragnarok? Or is something lost that will only ever be replaced by another one of those reboots, which in the comics appears to be happening every 5 years now, in which every character is recreated from scratch? And what ratio of seriousness to silliness do you prefer in your superhero films? Should they hew towards the ridiculous to match the preposterousness of such fictional powered beings? Or should certain forms of fantasy, including comic book films, provide us, as J.R.R. Tolkien once suggested, the prospect of recovery and consolation as well as escape?